Transportation Technical Committee meeting to order. Tracy, do we have a quorum?
Tracy's not here today, but yes, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Dylan. Since we have a quorum, I will ask for a motion and a second on the agenda. Note that it was amended and sent out yesterday.
Motion to approve the amended agenda, Mark Ankeny.
This is Rudy with Waukee. I'll second.
Thank you, Mark and Rudy. Since this is a virtual meeting, I'm only going to look for dissent on action items. So with that, I'll ask if there's anyone opposed to the motion. Hearing none, that motion passes. Moving on to item 2, approval of the meeting minutes. You have in your packet the July 11th meeting minutes. Can I get a motion in a second?
I'll move to approve. John Dostard, Altoona.
Rudy with Waukee. I'll second.
Thank you. Anyone opposed to the motion, please indicate by saying nay. Motion passes. Item 3, we have a presentation on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. Zach, are you going to kick this one off?
Yes, thank you. We have Mitzi Alex here today with us to give us an update on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. Mitzi's with Tool Design. I will turn it over to her to give us that update.
Hey, thank you, Zach. I'm going to share my screen, so give me just a second to do that. I know there was a lot of information sent to you in advance, and I don't expect that you've studied it all, but hopefully you had a chance to at least glimpse through it. Let me know if you're seeing the full presentation screen or not.
We're seeing the slide view, not the full.
There we go, I think.
Oh, there it is. Well, no,
All
we're
right.
still seeing the presenter view.
Because it's looking at the wrong, it's looking at the other screen. Swap my screens. There we go. Hopefully that'll do it.
You got it.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, I just want to give this group an update on where some things are at and hopefully prompt a little bit of discussion, get some feedback from you today. So we met with the TSC, Transportation Safety Committee, and walked through a lot of maps and slides to show them all the data that we've pulled together and we've been able to map to show where different high injury network shows up for different modes. And then when you show it all together, and then also the high risk network, which is more of a proactive approach to crash prevention versus the high injury network, which is a bit more reactive to where the crashes have happened. And we had one map that overlaid the two of the high injury and the high risk network. So I just want to walk through some of our discussion with that group, talking also about the maps, but also about the target goal and the year for the project. When we met with the TSC, they did discuss a range of topics. I know a couple of you were there, so you might be able to add some context to this, but there was really thoughtful discussion around a potential goal and year for this project from the TSC. The TSC doesn't make the decision on this ultimately. All the member communities that will be participating in this will need to adopt a resolution, and the MPO board will be adopting a resolution as well. That's my understanding, but we think it's helpful to bring forward to the board and to the other communities some well thought out discussion that the TSC has had and get feedback from this group as well. Ultimately, after a good, really healthy discussion, that group suggested that the goal should be to eliminate fatal and serious injury crashes by the year 2045. That broke down nicely to being 5% per year reduction based on the 2023 data as a starting point. There was a slide in the deck that showed that trajectory and how that would play out. I can share that on my screen right now if you'd like to see that. That might be helpful. It's the next one, this one. So the idea would be breaking it down. 2045 gives a pretty clear direction. Some folks thought that might be something the region could embrace. We do have a couple of communities within the region who've already adopted their targets, and where were they? I think it's Dallas County and the city of Des Moines both adopted 2040 as their target year with its elimination of fatal and serious injury crashes. I don't know if this group has had a chance to think about this at all or just skim through the content, but I'd love to see if there's any feedback or thoughts from this group on a target year and goal.
Mitzi, since I was in the room, I can convey a few more thoughts that were discussed by the group. One was just like, how realistic is this? We went around a lot about that, about, we're going to, each community is going to need to adopt this. Is it something that is realistic that they're going to say, okay, are we going to get dinged if we're not meeting this? And the discussion was really that this is a goal. It's meant to be a stretch. It's meant to make a statement. That's why the target is 0. So that we're making that statement that, no deaths and serious injuries are acceptable. But we know that it's also a stretch and that it's going to require, a lot of funding, a lot of effort, and some time to work into existing priorities. And so that's why on balance, we got to 2045. It's a little bit further out than some of the other examples. And we thought 5% per year reduction was something that could seem achievable and therefore adoptable.
I can't see folks right now, so yeah, please jump in, or if, Luis, if you can help pull in some conversation, would be great.
Mitzi, this is Steve Neighbor, City of Des Moines. How would that, did you say that each community has to do a resolution to adopt this? And I guess I'm not sure how that would work if Des Moines did we did a resolution for 2040. Then we're supposed to have another one that says 2045.
I don't think the city of Des Moines does need another resolution. You've made a commitment already, and it might be with a target date that's sooner. I don't think that's a conflict.
Okay, I didn't know if we need one, or there has to be one that maybe it says supports the Des Moines MPO's plan of target year 2045. But okay.
Yeah, I think we'll probably want that. It might, in this case, be good to still have the city of Des Moines adopt a resolution supporting this plan specifically, though, the region-wide plan.
Mitzi, this is Madeline Sturms with the City of Pleasant Hill. Question about the goal, recognizing that there are things that will forever be outside of our control, like high speed or drunk driving, those types of things. Is there interest or a thought in, so that we have a goal that we realistically could accomplish, that we're eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes that have an impact on safety, or that it is a roadway improvement that we could make that doesn't take into consideration those things that are totally outside of the control of what roadway improvements we could realistically make? Is there a thought on how to handle that so that it is something we could achieve?
That's a really common line of thinking, and this did come up with the TSC as well. One of the examples that was shared with that group was the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, that actually did achieve 0 fatalities. They did not achieve 0 serious injury crashes yet. They've made a very significant reduction in that. I think it's maybe 60%. But I like how they report it, so that they do separate the two when they're reporting it. so that you can see where the successes have been made, where they've been successful, and celebrate those. But they keep moving toward improving that even further and maintaining zero fatalities. I think that what I heard from the TSC, and again, Luis can share his thoughts on this. What I think I heard from the TSC is that by having a goal that's not zero, it suggests that there's tolerance and acceptance of any deaths on our roadways. And the group really felt uncomfortable with that being a message too.
Madeline, I think a little more context is that the plan is meant to address more than just engineering interventions, I believe, right? So there would be recommendations on education around, if drunk driving is the trend that needs to be addressed, then there's probably other things, in addition to or besides engineering that need to address that. So the hope is that this would be more comprehensive. And what I don't know is whether the specific funding source that we're going to probably immediately be applying for is also covers those other softer things, or is it just FHWA and it's just engineering? Like would enforcement? I know that's always one that comes in as a recommendation, and I don't know whether additional enforcement is immediately available for grant dollars, or that's a separate discussion to seek.
The plan will address more than engineering design solutions. It definitely will include things like education. It will address enforcement, but also some policies that communities can consider adopting that would set maybe different development standards in the future, instead of just retroactively responding to existing infrastructure, thinking about how to design differently in the future as well. Can we get a sense of whether this group is feeling like they're okay supporting this goal and target, or do you feel like you need more discussion and thought around that?
I guess maybe I'll just ask for if anybody has any serious dissent that they'd like to register. Would you mind speaking up or making a comment in the comment box? Well, you can still, register any comments before the end of this item or any time really. So you can keep moving though, Mitzi.
Thank you. And then I just want to mention too, we also talked with the TSC about how we might use the different maps to start to identify priority areas. Now, this is not ultimately the final prioritization of projects, but the idea is how do you start to narrow down the entire network to a more manageable quantity of locations to be looking at. And so we did talk about using both the high injury network and the high risk network as a way to start layering. And when you see both of them overlaid, that might be a little higher priority than the places where you only see the high risk network, let's say. So maybe where they're both overlapping might be a top tier. The next tier might be the high injury network where there have been those crashes. And then the next tier could potentially be that high risk network, which is the proactive. And it's based on roadway features and risk factors that might be associated with that roadway. I don't know if this group has any thoughts on this. We also will need to identify other features and factors that would play into prioritization for specific projects and locations. And I think that's on the next slide for us to discuss. maybe no comments on this one. I'm hoping on this slide, this group will have some good insight. So beyond identifying priority areas using the data and maps, prioritizing and selecting projects can be further guided by criteria. So this is an area where we think it'll be helpful to get feedback from this group, take it to some other groups, and then put it out to the public at our engagement events to give them the opportunity to weigh in on where they think higher priorities should be considered. So examples could be like the proximity to schools or other destinations like a park or transit proximity or the vulnerable user activity levels within a destination. I'd love to get feedback from this group on the kind of features and factors you think should be considered in a prioritization of locations for projects.
I think this is the neighbor Des Moines. I think one thing we've had a challenge with ours is so really the priority for the first 4 or 5 years, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really been kind of what's in our existing CIP because we don't have like a bucket of money. Like we don't have a bucket of money or budget just for just general transportation safety improvements, right? It's our CIP is dedicated to specific projects. So really, like kind of to this question, it's like, is it really projects that are in year 6, out of our CIP, or so we found a challenge from that aspect of really, and kind of off of Madeline's question too, of funding supporting not only projects but the software recommendations. Like again, we don't have buckets of money sitting there even for matches for SS4A, right? Our SS4A grant, to be honest with you, a lot of that grant was some of the projects we already had in the queue before even Vision Zero existed. So I just say that's kind of a challenge for us when we say prioritizing projects. I mean, obviously our council has brought up school areas as a priority to them. I'm not sure if that's where the crashes are, or say, and from a metro standpoint, if that's where the crashes are. So that's might not help them, but I'm saying that's a challenge for us. And when we say priorities, because the biggest challenge also we have is our plan wasn't really led by an elected official. It was led by staff. And so then that also is a challenge of where the money comes from. So, as well, like, is there really going to be money put toward these things? So I probably didn't help, but I was just kind of, I guess, identifying a challenge and how do I view the prioritization comment.
To add a little more context to that, one of our teaming partners at HR Green will actually be scanning through CIPs to see what projects might be overlapping with that HIN and HRN mapping. I think that's a really valid point.
And just to add a little bit to what Steve said, further the opportunities, you really need to identify what is a project. Is it a project in the sense that it's in a capital improvement program, or is it a project that is small enough that it could be, or a countermeasure could be part of a project that is essentially you're more of a maintenance and repair of a facility say a traffic signal, a pedestrian display that does not have countdown timers in it is damaged, and we go out and replace it. We're replacing it with a countdown head, and then trying to get the other heads in there at that time, up to that as best we can within the operating budget. So the monies are coming out of two different buckets, and I think maybe a prioritization that somewhat recognizes the scale of the countermeasure that may be implemented somehow being worked in may be beneficial.
Great feedback.
This is Mark Miller with the City of Ankeny. What about a benefit cost factor in that? Because you can do, several smaller projects with a lot of safety benefits, or you can do a bigger project with a safety benefit. So is there a benefit cost ratio that's used to for the prioritization?
I think that's a good question. I don't have an immediate answer on that, if that's been used in the prioritization within a plan versus if it's been used only for the funding sources.
I would echo Mark's comments because I mean that would be intriguing if, let's say, a certain crash type is occurring across the metro, and maybe a low cost measure is the yellow reflective back plates. That may be something that could kind of get us going at a lower cost if it has a bigger benefit, as opposed to converting a whole intersection to a roundabout or something. So that would be intriguing if there's like a certain crash type that could be tackled with more lower cost measures.
I did notice from the Hoboken, New Jersey webpage, and I encourage you to go look at that if you haven't already. It looked to me like they used a number of lower cost but broadly deployed strategies on their list. So I like the way that conversation's going. Any other thoughts or lessons learned from projects that you've already deployed or seen other communities use? Okay, this was really good feedback. We will take this into account as we're thinking about next steps and prioritization. Stop sharing my screen there. There we go. The rest of the slides after that one were really they were the slides from the TSC meeting. If you have any follow-up thoughts, I would encourage you to please share those with Zach. He's been taking some comments and follow-up thoughts from the TSC and forwarding them on to our team. And we can do that with this group as well. So thank you all very much for your time and for what you do to help make the roadways safer for everyone.
Thank you, Mitzi. Appreciate that. And just encourage anybody who's interested in seeing more detail. We try to keep it brief, just to respect everybody's time. But there's a lot more detail behind any of this. So encourage you, if you're interested, to go ahead and get engaged. Next up, we have another presentation, item 5, Water Trails Build Grant Update. I believe, Zach, you're going to take that one?
Yes, thank you. So we try to get the Water Trails consultant team together in front of you probably once a quarter just to give an update on the progress that's happening with the Downtown Water Trails project. So we have Mark Land here today with Snyder to provide us with an update on the construction.
Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to give everyone an update. I'm going to share my screen here. Everybody see that?
We cannot.
There it is.
There it is.
Okay. So the first thing I want to update everybody on is the project status at the Scott Avenue construction site. Of course, the thing that we need to focus on is the level of the Des Moines River. And you can see from this Saylorville Lake release that it's had gone way up, but the good news is that you can see where it's starting to track its way down. So I'll stop sharing that one and share. Let's see here. The next photo is so this is kind of what the photo looks like, or what the area looks like today. As you recall from previous updates, they had from May, they had gotten quite a good chunk done. In fact, I have a photo of that. You can see the photo. This is from May 1st. They had gotten about to this point, and then right before that, the waters came, and it's been kind of on delay with the photo that you had seen previously. So what we hope is that in the next week, we need to get the river gauge down to 18 and dropping. And once it does get down to that, the contractor will assess the kind of the impacts of what you see on the photo and see how it looks, clean things out. Hopefully it's a minimal effort that they can jump right back into continuing on with the placement of the rock and grout for that phase on this side of the river. Just kind of from the point where that starts, what we're thinking is we would need about 2 months of time to get this phase completed, or the stage completed on the north side of the river. So just kind of whenever we see them, hopefully in the next couple weeks, they can get started. Then it would be kind of 2 more months on top of that to move that forward. And then they would switch over to the other side of the river and start working on those stages. In terms of, there's been conversation before, there's a trail, you can see where those vehicles are parked. That trail would remain closed until we can get this phase done. So that is the an update on the current construction on Scott. Just to continue on with the uplands part, we are moving forward with the bid on October 15th through the DOT to bid the upland area. We've been working with the design team to get those plans in. Those were submitted yesterday for that process, and we expect to go through that and award the contract, hopefully at the MPO's regular meeting on October 17th, and be able to move forward with the next part of the construction. We have included a number of wordings about how to coordinate between those two contractors to make sure that can move forward smoothly. That's the update on the Scott Avenue project. And I will just share my last slide on Harriet, which is here. For the update on Harriet, that part of the project has been going very well. And the construction of what you see on the drawing there, the levee runs through about here, and pretty much everything is constructed up to the levee, with the exception of the access road to the city's pump station. And they're just about done with the access to the existing kind of frontage road. So we expect hopefully by next week that those, or the end of next week, that all of that would be completed. Everything kind of on the dry side of the levee would be kind of done and operational as far as the access points. We will be needing, similarly to what we talked about with Scott, we will need to be able to kind of hold off on everything on the water side of the levee until the water goes down. But the contractor is poised to jump right in as soon as that happens. They've been making very good progress, and we don't anticipate any issues once that water recedes. So that's the update on Harriet. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has on either one of those sites.
Any questions for Mark? Well, hearing none, Mark, just want to I want to thank you. Appreciate the update.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll move on to item 6, report and vote on the MPO population adjustments and joint resolution with SERPA. Z?
Yep, thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. As you might recall, the MPO updated our Metropolitan Planning Area Boundary, or MPA, earlier this year in January. And with this new expanded boundary, we've extended a bit into SERPA's former area. And so with this new expansion, the Iowa DOT has requested that the MPO confirm its new population within its new boundaries, and to confirm that number with SERPA as well. These numbers would then be used to update the Iowa DOT's funding formulas, such as for STBG. So at a minimum, the Metropolitan Planning Area Boundary, or MPA, includes the census-designated urban areas. So on the map, that's the areas in green. So by default, the Iowa DOT uses the population in the areas in green for its calculations. But historically, the MPO and SERPA has used its MPA population instead. So the MPA is the area that's outlined in black on the map. And so to calculate the population adjustments, MPO staff started with the 2020 census urban areas. So that's the part in green. That population is 547,861. And then we overlaid that with the 2020 MPA population in gray. That population is larger at 583,135. And when you subtract the two from each other, you have a difference of 35,274. So MPO staff prepared these calculations and reviewed them with SERPA staff as well. SERPA staff did not have any objections to the methodology or to the population numbers. So for next steps, the MPO would approve these population numbers and approve the joint resolution. And then next month, SERPA will do the same thing. They will approve the population numbers and approve their part of the joint resolution. Then afterwards, when the joint resolution is both approved by the MPO and SERPA, it will go to the Iowa DOT, and then the numbers will be used by the Iowa DOT to update the funding formulas for the next funding cycle. So happy to take any questions you might have on the population numbers and the joint resolution. And MPO staff recommends approval of the population adjustments and the joint resolution.
Thank you, Z. Any questions for Z? There's no questions or discussion, and we'll ask for a motion and a second on this item.
It's Rudy with Waukee. I'll move acceptance.
John without Tuna, all seconded.
Thank you, Rudy and John. Since we have a motion and a second, I'm just going to seek any dissent. If there's anyone who's opposed to the motion accepting staff's recommendation, please indicate by saying nay. Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you, Z. We're gonna move on to item 7. It's another voting item on the Transportation Capital Improvement Program update. Josh, do you have this one?
Yes, I do. Hello, everyone. I'm just bringing you guys an update on the Transportation Capital Improvement Program. So just to recap, a TCIP is a subset of municipalities' capital improvement programs and focuses on transportation-related projects and infrastructure that's required to maintain and improve the transportation network within the Des Moines Metro over the next 4 to 5 years. In the June 2024 Tech Committee meeting, I presented my vision for this project and sought your support to complete it. My vision for this was to create a regional TCIP that encompasses all local municipalities and counties within the MPO planning area. I'm grateful to those members who have made this project possible, as I'm now in the final stages refining my output, which will be an ArcGIS story map. Next slide, please. During the data collection process, I sorted the project data by budget year. So this project consisted of the fiscal years 2025 to fiscal year 2029. And by funding source, which are, for some example, are general obligation bonds, tax increments, financing, state or local grants. So in this pie chart here, this shows the percentage of total spending across the Des Moines Metro, which is broken down by municipality. So Des Moines accounts for the majority with 24.4% of the spending from 2025 to 2029, totaling just over $277 million. Urbandale and Waukee make up the next largest chunk, roughly about 20% each. And the total expenditure for the region throughout this 4-year period is $1.1 billion. Next slide, please. Each project is categorized into one of these 7 categories. You have roads and parking, pedestrian streetscape, bridges, trails, traffic safety, intersections, and transits. And this graph here illustrates just the count of each project type. So the majority of the projects that the region is focusing on are roads and parking. Next slide, please. This graph here illustrates regional spending by fiscal year. So as you can see, there's a significant decrease in infrastructure investment beyond the fiscal year 2025, with a little uptick after the fiscal year 2028, but still not comparing to what fiscal year 2025 spending is. Next slide, please. This graph here highlights the most utilized funding sources, which are for the region, which are general obligation bonds. You have TIF, federal and state contributions, and the other category, which includes general funds, sewer funds, water fund, and your local option sales tax and parking funds. I further analyzed the data by highlighting the different funding sources, which provide a great visual aid for the public to understand on how local governments fund local projects. So these graphs here compare Des Moines and Ankeny, showing that how different municipalities use different funding mechanisms. I made these graphs for each municipality. I'm just highlighting here Des Moines and Ankeny because it shows a little different in what funding source they are using. I do want to disclose that I got this data specifically from the CIPs that municipalities sent me. So each municipality could categorize their funding in a different way. Next slide, please. So Gunnar, would you want to bring up the story map here? Thank you, Gunnar. So here is just a section of what the final output would look like. This is a map that encompasses all the projects within the region with local municipality boundaries and our county boundaries on there. So the points indicate usually an intersection, maybe a parking lot, or some segment that is not a road. So you can click on each project here. And if Gunnar, if you'd like to click on one of the projects, a pop-up window will appear. So this is Broadway Ave. It's in Des Moines jurisdiction. It's classified as a road and parking project. And I have listed here the terminal, the street and project description, along with the money that is being spent for this project and the funding source it is coming from. So this one is all being funded by the general obligation bond. So you can go and click on each one of these projects and you will get the same description for that project as well. So this one here highlights the Ashward Road, different ones. So this again is all the money is coming from fiscal year 2025. I think we're all set here, Gunnar. So that's just a section of what the map holds. The story map will also hold all the graphs that have been included in this presentation, along with more explanation of what a CIP is, and also makes it easier for the public to understand. So my next steps are to finalize the story map, present the map to the executive and policy committees, and then publish the story map on the MPO website for public engagement. I thank you guys for your time, and staff recommends this for vote and receive file.
Thank you, Josh. I noticed that this is noted on the agenda as an optional vote. I'm curious when this is going to be shared with policy committee.
This will be shared in the August meeting.
Okay, so that's coming up.
Yes.
And then I also, sorry, I'm not recalling whether the details were shared back with the TCC, because as you noted, you were doing your best to interpret some of the details,
yes.
And I wonder if we all had a chance just to double check that before we take a vote.
They were not sent back. I got this data where what I received from the members of this committee.
Okay. And I'm not placing any judgment on any of that. I just want to make it clear before I ask for a vote, just to spark any discussion. If anybody has any concerns, because it is optional. It does seem like it would be best for us to put our mark on it before it goes to executive and policy. Welcome any other discussion from MPO staff if you have any suggestion, or if anybody on the committee has any concerns to register.
Yes, I do have a concern. This is John Larson with Urbandale. Some of those numbers kind of made me question. I don't know that every city does their CIP the same. I saw like us in Waukee at like 200 million. We're not doing that over the next 5 years. For instance, we'll list the Hickman interchange at 100 million with the DOT doing the vast majority. And I just wonder if that is skewing things.
Yes, so the 2029 fiscal year is classified as 2029 and unprogrammed. So those funding, the funding is reported on the CIP, but it can go past the fiscal year 2029.
Right, but I'm talking like that Hickman interchange is over the next several years. That again, I think that is distorting the total numbers. That I don't think Urbandale has, whatever that percent was of the entire metro CIP. I think that's not an accurate representation.
Yeah, I can double check that and get back with you. I'd be happy to talk about that with you.
John, I think what you're saying is that if the DOT reports the same project in overall for the state of Iowa, we're never double counting some of our projects. Is that what you're getting at, John?
Well, right, we could be. And for instance, if Clive does it different and doesn't list outside sources like we do, or if you did, yeah, we'd be doubling up with Clive and Urbandale.
Yeah, if I listed that same DOT project as 100 million and you listed it as 100 million, that's not $200 million project, it's a $100 million project.
Right. And I don't know how much we need to factor in the fact that, Clive and Urbandale are 10 million out of that 100 million. The DOT is taking care of the rest. I just think we may be skewing things on how the public looks at this.
Yeah, so for that scenario here, it would be under state and federal funds in your funding source graph, but it is still under Urbandale, as Urbandale is receiving the state and federal funds, if that makes sense.
but it wouldn't be the total amount. In other words, we're only getting a little bit of that really funded to us that we're paying for. DOT's paying it for a lot itself, and it's their project actually.
Yeah, I can double check and I'd be happy to get back with you guys on that.
This is
And
Madeline in
Luis, I guess
Pleasant
to your
Hill.
oh, go ahead.
I was to say, I sent our data and we weren't included in that either. So would love to have a conversation about how our information could also be incorporated.
Yeah, I can get back with you on that, Madeline.
Dylan, you want to provide any further clarification?
I was just going to offer that it sounds like there's still some questions and some data needs to be cleaned up. This was on here for optional vote. It's not required that we do it this month. The only pressing thing with this month is Josh is our summer intern and he's going to be gone by the time this comes back next month, but that's okay. We can figure that out internally. We'd rather that the information be right and everybody be comfortable with it before we launch this out to the public. So I would suggest we don't vote on it today and we can continue to work on this internally and then bring it back once we get the data more cleaned up and everyone's comfortable with it.
Josh and Dylan, this is Mike Ludwig. I was just noticing, like in the Des Moines data, particularly the other category was the largest funding category. I think it may be too consolidated. I think we may need to break out some of those separate funding sources into the graph. Otherwise, the graph shows other sources are our greatest funding source, and there's no information in there what those other sources are in the charts, at least. So I do think we need to have a little bit better delineation in our charts, at least.
Yeah, Michael, I realized going through and putting this presentation together today, I left general fund. I put that in the other category, and I think that deserves its own category as well. So I'm planning on going back through those graphs and adding some of those categories.
I can't remember what the percentages were, but I'm guessing local option sales tax is probably a fairly large one on ours as well. Okay. And I think our citizens probably would like to see that shown in a chart if they're looking at where money is. We have signs up on project that say funded by lost, things like that. I think it would be better to have that broken out a little bit more.
Yeah, I can definitely look into that.
Thank you.
So quick question, with all these comments, is this topic still going to be presented to executive and policy committees?
No, I would say we can pull it from those agendas. We haven't sent those out yet and make sure that this group's more comfortable with things before we show it to the policymakers as well.
I would think that would be wise. Thank you.
Josh, I appreciate all your work on this. Hopefully we can get a lot of this cleared up before you end your time here with the summer with the MPO. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item 8. Item 8, report an optional vote on the carbon reduction program funding process with Zach.
Thank you. So as you may recall, back when we awarded SDBG funding, there was also an award made to DART and CRP funding for $3.6 million. At the time of that award, the policy committee's direction to TTC and to staff was to create a funding process that would make the CRP funding then available to all of the member governments. And that the desire was to have that application process available as quickly as possible so other members could access that funding. So we met with the CRP funding subcommittee on May 16th. We had a really good discussion, probably lasted about an hour, talked about a lot of different things. But trying to summarize some of the things or the highlights that we talked about was that we wanted to have a simple process that was open to a variety of projects. We didn't want to limit the type of projects that could be applied for through this CRP funding. There was also a desire to keep this process separate from the SDBG timeline. There were a couple of reasons for that, just workload on communities having to, if we kept it with the SDBG timeline, they would have to be submitting numerous applications rather than just SDBG applications. The other benefit to keeping them separate is that if you apply for CRP funding and your application is not successful, then you have the option to turn around and apply for SDBG funding for that same project. So we felt like that was another good reason to keep these two processes separate. The discussion we had with the funding or the subcommittee was that we wanted to look at carbon reduction as the main criteria that we would review on these projects. That just seemed to make sense based on what the intent of the program is for that funding. There was some desire expressed to try to spread the CRP funding around equally among our member governments. We did inquire on this with Iowa DOT. Unfortunately, this runs into some suballocation rules that the DOT has where they don't want to see money just simply being suballocated to member governments. So that really is not an option for us to pursue with this funding. So based on the conversation we had with our subcommittee, staff went ahead and developed an application process or an application using a similar format as our STBG application. So it's a pretty simple Google form application like we use with STBG. A lot fewer questions in our STBG application. I think we're under 20 questions total on the CRP application right now. Most of those are short answer checkbox type questions. So it should be a pretty straightforward and simple application to submit. We also, part of our discussion with the subcommittee was how do we determine how much carbon is reduced with each of these projects. We looked at the Iowa DOT's ICAP program. They kind of put the onus on the applicant to develop a methodology and share that methodology with Iowa DOT. We felt like to just create some more consistency, we wanted to try to find something that was already existing out there. We did come across a carbon toolkit that's put out by the Federal Highway Administration. These are existing carbon calculators. There are several benefits to this. One of them is that they have multiple different calculators for different project categories. And we felt like this was good because it allows, a bike project's different than an adaptive system project. And we wanted to be able to, calculate carbon in a way that made sense for each one of those projects and not just have one methodology. The other thing the benefit of this is it does create a consistent methodology across all these applications. So anybody who's submitting a bike ped type project for CRP funding could use the same calculator, or if they're doing an adaptive system, they could use the same calculator. And that gives us some apples to apples comparisons on these projects. I would note that we did, in our application, we did mimic the project types. So that have calculators associated with them. So we have things like bicycle and pedestrian and shared micromobility as a category, adaptive traffic control systems, freight modal shift, congestion reduction and traffic flow improvements, a couple of different transit categories that had calculators, one of them for bus upgrades and one for service and fleet expansion. We did include another category, recognizing that there might be something that doesn't quite fall into one of these categories. And so we did provide that other category to acknowledge that. So as far as the proposed timeline goes, as I mentioned, the desire of the policy committee was to try to get this funding available as soon as possible. And if we want to keep these two, the separate process from STBG, we're proposing the timeline you see before you. Obviously, this depends on committees approving this process and this application. But if it was approved this month, we could get those applications out and make them available on our website as soon as later in August. We could have the applications due back in September, which would allow the funding subcommittee to review the applications and make a recommendation sometime in October. And then we could get that recommendation to policy in November. Our STBG application goes out in December, so this would keep those two processes separate. And as I mentioned before, if somebody went after CRP funding and was not awarded, it would allow them to then follow up with an STBG application. So that's the timeline that we're proposing, assuming that everybody's comfortable with the process and wants to approve it this month. We did send all these materials to the subcommittee for them to review. I will say that the majority of the committee agreed with the process and the timeline. They were comfortable with it. We did have a couple of concerns or questions that were expressed. One rep questioned whether this process would allow all of the members to get a portion of the CRP funding. As I mentioned before, staff talked about this. We met with the DOT, or we spoke with the DOT, and we just don't see any way we can guarantee funding to every member government without violating those sub-allocation rules that the Iowa DOT has. Another suggestion or question was whether or not we had run some of these projects through those calculators. We have not at this point. We did discuss whether or not we wanted to do that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of questions in those calculators that we don't ask in our current STBG application, so we don't have that information readily available to us. It certainly is an option for us to test out these calculators if you would like us to. It would require us to reach out to our member governments and take some of these previous STBG applications and ask for additional information to do that. So it would take time. It would delay this application process. Certainly something we can do if that's what the desire of the committee is. But just want everyone to understand that if we did do that, it would take time, more staff time on our part and our member government's part to get that information back to us. Again, this is on here for an optional vote. If the committee is comfortable moving forward with this process, we would take this on to exec and policy for their approval. From a staff perspective, we are recommending approval of this process. We do feel like it addresses the concerns of the policy committee, the majority of the concerns that were expressed by the subcommittee, and it allows us to move forward and get this funding out there and available to all of our member governments to apply for. Happy to take any questions you might have about the process. Otherwise, staff does recommend approval of the CRP process.
Thank you, Zach. Questions for Zach?
Zach, this is Mark with Ankeny. Would this funding not be available until FFY 2029?
So the funding that is available currently is from, I believe, FFY 2026 to 2029. So the fund we would have funding that would be available earlier than that. Not all of it can be made available earlier than that, but some of this funding would be available as soon as 2026.
Okay, thanks.
And Zach, is the intention to run one process and then distribute money that the MPO would receive through 2029, or would it be something that you would have another application round next year?
So the intent, I think, would be to run an application process this fall that would include funding from 2026 to 2029. And then next fall, we would run an application cycle that would have 2030 funding only.
Okay.
And then the idea being that we would just have that process every year, just like STBG. Now, it is a smaller amount of money, so we could entertain a conversation about whether or not we let it build up a couple years and only do a CRP process every few years just to let that money build up a little bit more. We only get about 1.4 million in CRP funding a year. So that is something we could certainly discuss as far as how we handle it after this year. But we do have a number of years this year. I think we have somewhere between 5.8 and $6.9 million available to award in CRP funding. So it's a substantial amount. And the Iowa DOT really wants us to draw that balance down by awarding the funding.
Any other questions or comments? This is an optional vote. I'm gonna ask for a vote unless anybody has any major concerns.
Yeah, this is Madeline with Pleasant Hill. I just want to say I still have concerns about how this is. It doesn't take into consideration the overarching goals that we're trying to accomplish, the types of projects that as a region we want to advance. And my concern with using only the calculators as the only criteria that we are looking at to score the applications is that places like Des Moines that have the most congestion, are they just automatically going to score higher points and then get all of the funding, which takes the other communities out of the running for getting any consideration? So I still have concerns with only using the calculators without looking at the bigger picture of what that actually will mean for how the funding will get distributed.
Now, I will say the intent is not that the calculators are the only thing that is judged by the funding subcommittee. It's just a data point for them to consider while they're looking at those applications. I don't believe the intent is to just prioritize them based on which one has the highest carbon reduction score. We
And I
don't
would
do
be
that
very
with our
curious
other
to know
sport.
what those other decision criteria are that this funding subcommittee is using, because at this point, all that's been presented is the calculator is the only piece of information that they are using.
Zach, is that developed by the funding committee, or is that something that gets developed usually ahead of time?
It, ultimately, the decision of how this funding is awarded is up to the funding subcommittee to make a recommendation to exec and policy. That's how the STBG process works. That's how we envision this process would work as well. We have a scoring system for STBG that accounts for a lot of different things based on our long range plan. At the end of the day, it's one point of information the funding subcommittee uses to evaluate those projects and make recommendations of funding. So we see that this would work similar to the STBG process. The carbon reduction calculators provide them that data source that they can consider, but ultimately they factor in a lot of things into their decision. But it's kind of the funding subcommittee's discretion to look at those applications and make their recommendation. And I guess we see that this process would work similar to how STBG works currently.
Which are aligned with the long range transportation plan, I imagine, or other
with that,
policy.
They consider a lot of things. They consider, what communities kind of getting some geographical sharing the money across the region. There's a lot of things that they consider in their decision making that kind of gives them flexibility to award those funds how they see fit. The stricter we would make the criteria, could create other issues that we could certainly discuss, but I think it's a much broader discussion about how the funding process works in general that we're not really addressing today.
So I know, Zach, that you'll share. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Luis. I was just going to say, I'll ask Madeline or anybody else too, if there are other criteria you think that this should incorporate, we'd be happy to consider that. Like Zach said, we kind of focused on the carbon reduction because that's the point of the program. But if there are other factors that should be put in there, I'm thinking environmental justice or things of that nature. Those are things we can consider. And ultimately, like Zach said, we want the technical committees review and approval of this. But again, it's going to also go to the policy committee and they can make adjustments too. But we want to make sure this is just like the other stuff we've talked about. We want to make sure everybody's comfortable with what's being presented and what's going to go forward to that committee.
Madeline, you mentioned project types that aren't accounted for in this. Do you have an example of what was not accounted for?
I don't think I have that specific example. I think we have missed the overarching priority of, does this group want to fund bike ped projects? Do we want to fund fleet projects? Is there an overarching priority that we're trying to get accomplished across the metro? Maybe it's something that other funding sources aren't otherwise providing funding for, that we want to use this money to advance those other opportunities. We've talked a lot about the EV charging stations, and when that came back, that was no longer the priority of many communities. What is our priority? What do we need help funding? And then how can we use this to advance those goals instead of just using this as another pot to fund things that otherwise could get funded through STBG or TAP or other things? How can this be a gap filler for us? I guess that's where my concern is that this is going to potentially take away funding for projects that could be funded elsewhere when cities maybe, we all need more funding right now because of our budget constraints. So how can we use this to help be a gap filler to fund those priorities that the region wants to accomplish, whether that's, solutions from your comprehensive safety action, are there things in there, whatever it is, but making sure we're considering those overarching policies that the metro wants to accomplish, how can this be a tool to do that?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'll say sorry, I can turn on my camera as I talk, I suppose. I would say I think that was something we tried to discuss in that initial meeting, and I guess what I heard, and maybe I was mistaken, is that we didn't want to limit it to just one particular type of project like that. Although I think what you're advocating or what you're saying, Madeline, makes a lot of sense. If there's an overall priority we want to accomplish, this would be a great way to do it. But I guess what I heard was we don't want to make that decision. We want to kind of leave it open to communities to do whatever makes sense for them individually and keep it pretty general. So that's why we ended up where we are.
And I think doing that, leaving it open-ended is fine, except for if we don't understand how the calculator is going to work, then it's going to not prioritize the projects in a way that is actually helpful to communities to get funding. Because if my priority is fleet replacement, but Des Moines' priority is, a intersection improvement that automatically is going to reduce carbon more than my fleet replacement, they're not going to, compare in any means in what the carbon reduction is, because we've prioritized using the calculator and using carbon reduction as that number one data point that we're providing, and not how are we advancing the policies and goals of the region.
I think Madeline raises really good points. Can others maybe speak up so that we can try to craft a way forward?
This is Rudy with Waukee. I was on the committee for this effort. And while I hear what Madeline's saying, I would support moving forward with the process presented by staff here today.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Mark with Ankeny, and I guess I view the carbon reduction calculation as just one of the evaluation criteria, as I think Zach has said, and as I have understood. So it's not the only criteria, it's just one of them. So I also support moving forward with the proposed process here.
Any other comments and questions? So I do understand that we have some mixed feedback on this that I'm sure will get shared with the policy committee. I am still going to ask for a vote, since it sounds like we do have some interest in forwarding on staff's recommendation potentially. So with that, I am going to ask if anyone has any dissent. First I'll ask for a motion in a second on staff's proposal.
This is Rudy with Waukee. I'll move accepting the proposed process.
It's Mark with Ankeny. I'll second.
Thank you, Rudy and Mark. So we have a motion and a second. Now I'll ask if there's any dissent. If anyone's opposed to the motion, please register by saying nay.
Nay.
I'm saying one nay. Thank you. So with that, the motion passes. Zach, do ask that you share the feedback, the concerns, any ideas that you all have for how to, because it is a new program, how to manage it in future funding cycles, if some of the concerns play out. But like you said, it sounds like the funding committee does have a lot of leeway on how they're going to judge these things.
Yes, we'll definitely share all that information with exec and policy.
We're going to move on to item 9. This is just a report on the federal fiscal year 26 ICAP pre-applications with Zach.
Thank you. So ICAP applications, the deadline to submit those was July 31st. We're presenting those items to you here in August, just for your information and review. We'll bring them back in September for a vote and then get resolutions to project sponsors prior to the October 1st deadline. We have received 2 applications, which I have listed on the next slide there. One from the city of Des Moines for their Southeast 14th Adaptive Signal Control Project. They're requesting a little over $2 million in ICAP funding. And then Urbandale and Clive are requesting money for their I-35/80 US 6 interchange at $2.5 million. I will say that if your intent is to submit an ICAP application and you have not had an opportunity yet to submit that initial application to us, please reach out to me and let me know. There is still time to get those applications into us. So please reach out and let me know if you still do intend on applying for ICAP funding in this fiscal year. Otherwise, it's just information. Happy to take any questions you have.
Any questions? Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Looks like we have Z with upcoming events.
Yep, thank you. So we've prepared some upcoming events for the month of August. In terms of webinars, August 15th, FHWA has a webinar called Using Data Effectively to Tell Your Community's Stories. And then on August 20th, we have Progress and Pitfalls, a real talk on equity and roadway safety. In terms of upcoming events later this month in August, we have the Iowa State Association of Counties Conference in Des Moines. Then next month in September, also in Des Moines, we have the Iowa Streets and Roads Workshop and Conference. And then in October, we have APA Iowa Conference in Sioux City. Next slide, please. One other upcoming special event, the Iowa DOT Modal Transportation Bill shared a free hazardous materials railroad safety training with us. And so please let those in your fire and police departments know of this training opportunity. There'll be 3 separate training sessions at the end of August held at the Union Pacific Railroad Yard in Des Moines. Trainings will include lunch and a certificate will be provided at the end, and you can register at the link on the slide.
Thank you, Z. Are there other items of interest to the committee?
I have one brief one. Want to give you a heads up that staff is in the process of updating its Title VI documentation. We'll be bringing these documents to committee next month for votes. We're anticipating a pretty basic update to existing documents. Mostly we're just going to be updating data. One thing that we do need to do, and I would like to ask for a minute of your time right here and now, if I can. We need to survey our committees on ethnicity and gender. I'm dropping a Survey Monkey link into the chat. If you would pretty please take 30 seconds to fill those out. I would much prefer have you tell us rather than us try to venture a guess. So that's all I have. But if you'd please take 30 seconds to do that, that would be much appreciated by staff.
Yeah, I just did it, guys. It took less than 30 seconds. Let's fill it out for Gunner. Are there any other any other non-action items of interest?
I just have one quick reminder. Staff did send out chapters 1 and 2 of the LRTP to this committee to review. We sent them back on July 23rd, just asking if you do want to review and provide any comments on those first 2 chapters of the plan. Please do get those back to us by August 6th, if possible. Thank you.
So with that, our next meeting date is September 5th at 9:30. Please fill out the survey that Gunner linked to in the chat, and I will take a motion in a second for adjournment.
I move to adjourn, Mark. Thank you.
Second, neighbor.
We have a motion, a second. Any opposed to adjournment? Thank you.